Entering the atmosphere in T minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Omega Metroid podcast. I am Dak alongside Doominal here today for this week's episode, really, episode 232, to talk some more Metroid. Doom, it's been a little bit. How you doing, man? I haven't seen you in a little while. Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you very much. Old man 31 gang over here. Yeah, I was supposed to have a day off today, but I got called in and I needed the money, so we're recording a little bit later than usual. But yeah, otherwise, we're hustling and bustling, we're grinding and dining.
Yes, absolutely. We're doing it. It's recording late here for me, but it's nice and perfect recording time for you, and that totally works for us because it's a perfect time for everyone to listen in as we're talking some more Metroid this week, as usual. And yeah, it's actually been a little bit since I've been on the show. I think since the Metroid Prime 4 trailer dropped, pretty much, and then I moved, and now I'm in the new spot. So I'm glad to be back on the show. Obviously, good to be here with you. Andy can't join us here tonight, unfortunately, but we're looking forward to having him back on the show as soon as possible. Hope he's doing well. Yeah, so we got together, myself and Doom. We're like, what are we going to talk about this week? We got a bunch of questions laying in our Q&A channel on our Discord server, so we figured, you know what, let's pull some of those, some stragglers that haven't been answered just yet. And we also want to talk about another discussion or another topic that we had been discussing on our Discord server and another channel. So if you haven't joined us on Discord, definitely join us, because not only will you get to chat with us and the rest of the community throughout the week, but sometimes we'll end up talking about something on the show, so you get a little sneak peek or even be involved in the discussion before we bring it to the show. So one of those discussions that we had in the Discord was actually prompted by a YouTube video that was posted in the server. So let's jump right into that. We got an idea to talk about this. It was a video posted by a channel called NX Beyond, called Metroid Prime 4 Beyond needs to be less Metroidvania to grow, ? So we were thinking about getting some questions together and answering them, and we thought for our larger discussion here on the episode tonight, we would talk about this topic right here, this kind of proposition. Does Metroid need to be less Metroidvania to succeed, is kind of what we're going at it with, right? You know, Metroid Prime 4 and beyond, not just Metroid Prime 4 beyond, but in general, does Metroid need to be less like Metroid in a way to succeed at a larger level? And what does that really mean? So we thought that would be fun to talk about a little bit on the show. We also have some other topics we're going to get to before we round it out. But Doom, this was a little bit of a discussion in the server. A lot of people were feeling, Metroid should stay how it is. That Metroid can stay how it is and still grow, and of course some other people saying that Metroid needs to change. It needs to change like Zelda changed with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and reach a larger audience by maybe expanding into a new genre or changing the usual formula that the franchise is known for. And does that, could that apply to Metroid? Does Metroid need a Breath of the Wild of its own or something completely different to change the formula in order for it to succeed? Or can Metroidvania and, Metroid in general and Metroidvania in general succeed without needing those kinds of changes? Doom, first impressions on this discussion. What are your immediate thoughts on this?
If we're taking the topic of the discussion literally, like does Metroid need to be less of a Metroidvania? I pretty heavily disagree with that. I feel I don't really feel like, of the things that are holding Metroid's potential as a franchise back, I don't really think that's one of them. I think, and we were talking about this before the show, but I think really the biggest hurdle that Metroid has going for it is its abysmal performance in Japan. I feel like that's the big thing that's holding the series back, because you look at even smaller franchises than Metroid, like Xenoblade, for example. Xenoblade, it's still a very good performing series for what it is, a very niche JRPG kind of series, but even though it sells less than Metroid does on average, it still does decently in Japan, and so that series is still going to get a constant stream of updates, sequels, DLC, ports, you name it. And that's not to say that Metroid isn't, especially in the Switch era. We are starting to see a more frequent rollout of Metroid content. We're certainly not in a drought anymore like we were Super to Prime or Other M to Federation Force. But yeah, I feel like, if there's anything that Metroid needs to improve on, I feel like it's, how well it performs in Japan. I feel like that's the big thing. And Nintendo clearly, I think very much agrees. So, they've tried to experiment a lot, with the franchise, Other M probably being the biggest example, which unfortunately didn't really succeed for anybody there. But yeah, I feel like, if there's anything the series needs to work on, I'm kind of just going in circles at this point. It's really that Japanese audience retention that needs to be handled. I don't necessarily think, at least at this point, if Metroid is a brand new series that was starting from scratch, maybe you can make an argument that, like, hey, maybe it would make more sense to do a different genre to get more sales. But I think at this point, Metroid has established itself as this to the point that if you completely go off in a different direction, at least for a mainline entry, you're scaring off your core base, but you're also, I don't think, reeling in new players. But and so you're not really getting the benefits of that, but you're getting like all of the negatives. And there's more that I want to talk about, but I'll hand it off to you because I've kind of been talking for a bit now.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm gonna come in here and say I disagree. I don't think that's the biggest problem with Metroid at the moment. Certainly it's Metroid to be doing better in more markets would be great, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of reasons that we could all dig into of like the reasons why the Japanese market doesn't really respond to Metroid. But I wouldn't say that that's the biggest thing. And even to the point you just made now, I mean, you could argue that, let's say you make a completely open world Metroid game. I don't know. I don't agree with this, but you could make a completely open world Metroid game. Let's say there's, 100 million open world gamers out there that love that type of genre. You might get 10 million of those, and you might lose maybe the 3 million that buy Metroid games already, but you still have 7 million left, right? That's still kind of a game in that hypothetical, right? I feel like the genre shift could certainly help for Metroid. I think the biggest thing that's holding the two biggest things that are holding Metroid back. Number one is the replay value. I think with Metroid, the things that hooked gamers back when Metroid was first around in the Super Metroid and even Metroid Prime, that like stuff like 100% completion or a secret ending, that stuff isn't really as tantalizing, I think, anymore to gamers in terms of like going back and playing a game. Like, not everybody speedruns, not everybody's a dedicated Metroid fan. Like, why should the casual Metroid fan go back and play Metroid Dread more than once, unless they really, really love the gameplay? So I've felt like what Metroid really needs is to really bolster its replay value. More modes, more ways to customize, more ways to go to play with, friends, multiplayer, all that kind of stuff. The stuff that gets you going back into the games. When I was replaying Metroid Prime Remastered, I personally had a lot of enjoyment of going back and playing a hard mode 100% run, right? But I'm a minority of people who've probably played the game and who'd like to do that. And even then, I only did that once. I didn't keep going back and playing Metroid Prime Remastered after that. So I think the replay value thing is one. But the other thing, and I think maybe this is something you might want to comment more on, is I think the main appeal of Metroid from the beginning of the franchise is like getting lost and figuring your way out of situations, right? Like, that's the appeal of Metroid. The isolation, being lost on a planet, figuring out puzzles, trying to make solutions on your own. But I feel like today's general audience of gamers, like, they don't want to get lost. They don't want to be wandering around and being lost and not knowing where to go. And Metroid kind of plays to that. And I think that's why it's kind of niche, because there's a lot of instant gratification and immediate, gameplay loops that are quick and snappy, which Metroid is not. It's long sessions and keeping track of where you're going and getting lost and figuring it out. That to me doesn't speak well, or probably wouldn't play well to a lot of younger generations. Do you feel like that maybe I'm on track there, or maybe I'm off base?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you're saying so far.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I feel like are the two biggest ones. It's like when you put someone into a Metroid game, you're like, okay, go out and get lost, and people don't want to do that. They want to quickly play the most fun fun parts of the game immediately. They want to get the stuff upgraded. They want to unlock stuff. I'm not saying everybody's like that, but certainly there's that sentiment and like that feeling of gameplay and just gaming in general, I think, has shifted in that way over the past decade and a half. And Metroid doesn't play to that.
Yeah, I think a lot of a lot of gamers, they don't want it to be obvious that you're holding their hand, but they also don't want to be like completely lost without a, without a,
Right.
a clear signal of what to do. Like I know a lot of people, were memeing on, God of War Ragnarok when it came out. Like, oh, the characters, they keep casually conversing and giving the answers to all the puzzles. And that was like, a huge meme. But like, yeah, the reason that, they were doing that is because for most people, if they didn't do that, they would have gotten frustrated and put the game down.
Yeah, no, I agree. And if you look back at like at the Metroid Prime games, I think that's one thing that Metroid Prime 3 does really well is that initial area, like that initial mission is very much on rails. So it gets you into the experience like without you feeling confused on where to go. And then by the time you finish that, you're like, okay, maybe now I feel confident enough or interested enough to go and maybe get lost and roam on my own. And even then, the game is still pretty not linear, but it's certainly kind of pointing you in a direction to go more or less if you pick up on the clues, which are not exactly non-obvious. So yeah, I feel like does maybe Metroid Prime 4 need to have more of that hand holding, or should it be like open worldy but clear where you're going and not necessarily just a big sandbox where you're kind of plopped in and maybe this applies more to Metroid Prime. Maybe 2D Metroids don't need this change, but even 2D Metroids, like do those games need to be less Metroidvania-y to bring in a bigger audience? I'm not sure what that would look like.
See, I think of that more as like, accessibility options or quality of life improvements. I don't really consider that making it less of a Metroidvania. I just
Mm-hmm.
feel like it's giving you more options to play with. So like I know you weren't with us during the Prince of Persia discussion, but like I think that game serves as a fantastic template to how you can serve both hardcore Metroidvania fans that want to get lost, as well as have a an easy jumping on point for more casual players who they're a bit worried about getting lost. You can really cater the experience to whatever type of gamer you are. Like you can rank up the difficulty on the combat if you want to have like frame perfect parries and just absolutely brutal enemy attacks. You can do that if you want. Or you can also turn that down, and conversely, you can also make the Metroidvania experience easier. You can have like a ton of, you know, pop-up notifications and icons on your map if you want to know where to go. You can have little reminders to tell you like different areas that you need to visit if you don't want to get lost. Or conversely, you can just wipe that whole map clean, make it as blank as possible, and just immerse yourself and just chart your own path without anyone telling you what to do. And whichever one you choose, there's no wrong way to experience the game.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way to serve everybody, and I think both options do it well. And I think that's kind of where I see Metroid going.
Mm-hmm. No, I actually got to still play that game because you've been talking so highly of it since it's come out.
It's so much fun. It's up there with a Thousand Year Door right now as my two Game of the Year candidates. So
Really? Wow. Have you finished Thousand Year Door?
no, I haven't had a lot of time. I haven't had a lot of time to game, and so it's been taking me a little bit,
Yeah.
but I've been thoroughly enjoying my time with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree that I don't think necessarily Metroidvania or Metroid needs to be less Metroidvania, but I do think it maybe needs to open itself up a bit more in what the Metroidvania experience is, right? Like maybe keeping the formula, but allowing you to tweak a bit more of the things that you collect, right? For example, could be one of those big things. Because I think and I'm not saying this video ends up doing that, but I know the discussion usually goes to like, oh, Metroid needs to be open world and needs to be this, needs to be that. Um, I mean, it's over halfway through 2024, right? Breath of the Wild came out in what, 2016, 2017. The open world like genre has been maybe not saturated, but like I feel like everything's become open world since then, right? Like it was novel at the time when like all you had was Skyrim and like Ubisoft games, like, but now like everything is open world. It feels like Halo is, Genshin Impact, Zelda, like everything is open world. Like Pokemon's open world, it's like, would it even make sense for Metroid to chase that trend now, almost a decade after like it started really get going? I'm almost kind of thinking like, what would, if Metroid were to kind of make a genre shift, maybe that's not the way to go, and maybe there's a different way to go. And I've been thinking like, what is that like? But like, if we were wanted to, Metroid to kind of go beyond the confines of the Metroidvania genre, and maybe not open world, what direction would it go in?
Yeah, So here's my thing. I'm actually not opposed to the idea of Metroid eventually going open world, or at least kind of experimenting with it. I think the key is, are you doing it because it's a creative decision that, the team has, that they think they can make something really interesting with this, or is it trend chasing? Because if it's trend chasing, I'll tell you right now, it's probably not going to work. And
Yeah.
this is what I wanted to talk with earlier, because I brought it up in the Discord. When you start trend chasing, you get really unfortunate results like Concord, which, for those who didn't hear today, Sony in like a day or two is about to take Concord completely offline after the game has been released for less than 2 weeks, and it's genuinely awful. I cannot stress how bad I feel for that development team right now, and I wish nothing but the best for them. But unfortunately, like when they started working on the game, it was 2016. It was just when Overwatch came out, and they wanted to make their own version of Overwatch, which in 2016 makes sense because there's only Overwatch. But now the year is 2024, and you're releasing this, and now, like, hero shooters are like, all the rage. There's like
Yeah.
hero shooter everywhere you look. Call of Duty became a hero shooter, like, and so all of a sudden, you have this, this hero shooter with this diverse cast of characters, and but you don't really, and with a Blizzard-esque art style, but you don't really have anything else to offer, and it doesn't really stand out. I mean, Marvel Rivals, that's another one coming out at the end of the year. Like, it's hero shooters everywhere. And so yeah, I feel like if Metroid just became open world just for the sake of trying to capture a bigger demographic, I mean, it's possible that, maybe you'd get a few more sales. It's also going to be a way more expensive game to make, and Metroid's already, I would imagine, a fairly expensive series to make, but you turn that into an open world game, and that budget is going to balloon even more. And if anything, I feel like Metroid should be trying to save costs, not balloon their costs even more.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, when you think of like an open world game, you think of these games that have just ballooning budgets. They're in development forever. And yeah, Concord was a game that at the time that was a novel idea that it comes out. And I mean, Valve just is putting out the alpha for Deadlock, though. To be fair, that's more of like Smite than Overwatch, but like that's kind of a comparison there. You said Marvel Rivals, which to be honest is really only big because of the IP, not because of the gameplay, and not because of the type of game it is. Even though that's still a pretty popular genre of game. But I agree. I was thinking, actually, not that I think this would make any sense, nor do I think Nintendo would do it, but like, imagine if, like, I think the trend that Metroid would maybe chase would be like the Elden Ring, Dark Souls type trend, where it becomes maybe more hard, like harder. You have stamina, and you have like this darker kind of lore, and a big map, but it's not like it is open world to a degree. But that kind of always made sense to me, because when I think of like Elden Ring, that's a game that's very like light on plot, high on lore, which is Metroid Prime in a lot of ways. And having like these big like bosses and being able to roam this world but go on quests and do specific things, I was like, oh, I could see that, maybe that formula maybe working for Metroid. You get Metroid Souls or something like that. Like that could be interesting, and that could be, to me, makes more sense than like, oh, Metroid hero shooter, Metroid open world, Metroid of the Wild.
Yeah, and admittedly, I haven't played any of the Dark Souls or Elden Ring yet, but from what I have heard from people that have played both Metroid and Elden Ring, there's a lot of connective tissue, especially between those Prime games and the Elden Ring games, because I guess you revisit a lot of areas that you've previously done before. I don't know. I don't know how much. Yeah, I don't know how much, like, getting new power ups factors into all that, but like, I could definitely see where you could bridge those two.
Yeah, like essentially kind of replacing the RPG elements of like an Elden Ring with the more classic Metroidvania elements of like picking up upgrades and working with that on a character. I don't know. That's to me where I think. Not, again, I don't think Nintendo would necessarily do that, but I do feel like that's the trend. That, like, if Metroid were to chase or maybe get influenced by a bit more, it could go in that direction, perhaps, more than like an open world, like, and you could still retain those kind of Metroidvania aspects. And to kind of get back to our larger point here, I think we agree. I think both of us agree that like Metroid doesn't necessarily need to not be a Metroidvania. However, I will at least say that there are aspects, like I mentioned, of especially the lostness of Metroidvanias that maybe do hinder it a little bit. And maybe if we were able to, maybe if the games didn't have that much of that element, would Metroid succeed a bit more? I think yes, there is some argument to that.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that 100%. Yeah. Like basic and again, it goes back to that Prince of Persia conversation. No matter what, because of the kind of game Metroid is, like there's going to it's an already niche genre to begin with. It's a niche franchise in a niche genre. And so no matter what you do, it's just it does have a ceiling, but I don't necessarily think that's a
I
bad
don't think
thing.
that's a bad
I
thing
think
either.
yeah, again, I was just, talking about Xenoblade earlier. That's again a very niche franchise, arguably a more niche franchise than Metroid even. But I'd argue that series is also in a very healthy spot right now, because it's able to cater to that audience and it's, able to constantly, reinvest and re-up, that dedicated fan base while, just slowly growing. And I think Metroid right now is in a similar position. It's definitely, we're definitely not on dire straits where, after Metroid Prime, we were seeing the series sales decline. I guess really Metroid Prime 4 is going to be going to be the big question on it, but I think I would be genuinely shocked if Metroid Prime 4 underperformed where Dread was.
I mean, I think it'll probably be the best selling Metroid game when it drops for sure, just by virtue of being on the Switch when like literally everybody owns it by then at that point, because it's gonna be like the last major release for it, which is it's interesting that we're kind of talking about that now when we've been saying for a while like, oh, I hope Metroid Prime 4 isn't like Samus Returns on the Switch, but I think we'll have that backwards compatibility, so it'll be a big deal. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think, really honestly, I think the thing Metroid Prime 4 needs to be is have a solid single player of Metroid Prime, and then I think if it had online multiplayer, it'd have no problem selling. I think that's really the biggest thing. Like if you look at the top selling Switch games, six of the top 10 are multiplayer games. And if they're not, they're Mario and Zelda, which Metroid is not. So like to me, it's always made so much sense. Make a real like go back to like not everything needs to be live service or always on or an MMO or whatever. Like it would be great to go and like have a nice like on its own separate distinct campaign that I play, and then a nice separate distinct multiplayer suite that I can play, and do those. That to me is how I think Metroid, truthfully, I think that's the best way Metroid would be able to extend to a larger audience, because you wouldn't have to give up the classic Metroid experience because you have the campaign and you'd have the online multiplayer, which would give you the replay value and the means to play with friends and keep going back to the game and play it without having to get lost in the Metroidvania experience, and cater to both those markets without losing what Metroid is, in my opinion. I don't think it needs to change genres as much as I think Metroid Ring would be really cool, Elden Metroid, or even like a Metroid RPG of some kind. But I think, truthfully, that's the best way that Metroid could succeed.
Necessarily think Metroid Souls would be necessarily a genre change. That almost feels like a natural evolution, or maybe like a
Right,
sub
yeah.
series that just kind of just naturally spawns again, because those are so closely related.
Yeah.
But yeah, going back to the multiplayer again, I don't really have any critiques there. 100% agree. I feel like you got a solid player there, and because one of the big one of the biggest things with Metroid is that it doesn't quite have the legs of some of the other series. Like Metroid Dread did insanely well out of the gate, but then after we entered 2022, all of a sudden it just kind of slowed to a crawl, and it didn't really pick up that momentum. Whereas you look at Breath of the Wild, and like that's I think last quarter it ended up selling even more than Tears of the Kingdom did in that quarter, despite being this super old game, because it just keeps going. And then obviously you got stuff like Mario Kart. Pretty much everybody is buying that the second they get a new Switch anyways. That's like the default game you have to have. And so obviously I'm not expecting Metroid to have legs on that level. Those are kind of the exception, not the rule. But that is something that I would like to see Metroid improve, is to have those legs. And I feel like having a multiplayer mode that you can easily go back to, going back into that replayability topic. Multiplayer is such a good and easy way to do that, and it kind of falls into the live service category, but it's a bit different. But I think Splatoon is a great example of how you keep a multiplayer fresh, you keep it going. You have these small free updates that keep trickling out and going on, but they also, what's the word, they don't feel quite as predatory as your typical free to play live service multiplayer, where it's like, yeah, you get these free updates, but there's also this other stuff that we really want you to buy. You don't really get that with Splatoon, and I don't think really Metroid needs to go that way either.
No, I mean, I think what would be great for Metroid is, yeah, the reasons to go back to the game. So, like, Dread had a couple good points for that. Like, obviously, some patches came through, but, like, Boss Rush mode was added, and Dread mode was added, and Rookie mode was added. So, like, those were reasons to go back to the game. But, like, those were only a couple moments. I agree. Like, and Andy's talked about this, and even others on the server, where, like, what works for, Zelda and Mario and Pokemon is that there's a new one every year. There's always new stuff. Whereas Metroid, you play a Metroid game, and then you don't hear from it for 3-4 years until the next one comes out. Whereas I'm not expecting a new Metroid game to drop every year, but you could keep those games in the gaming, like, I guess not zeitgeist, but like at least in the sphere more often by releasing major updates, once a quarter, whatever, like that, putting out some DLC. Like we've talked about it, like doing a DLC post game mission with Silex or something like that. Or, I mean, Splatoon did that, Zelda did that, where they had this extra DLC that added extra content to the game that wasn't just like a new way to play it, but was literal, actual extra content. And I think that would be great for Metroid Prime 4, whereas the game comes out, you could get Boss Rush added, you could get Prime mode added, Rookie mode added, whatever. But then maybe, halfway through the year, a year down the line, there's not going to be another Metroid Prime for a while, but there could be some DLC, adding a new mission or adding, a bunch of new content, a new area, something like that, that really gives you a reason to come back to the game aside from just wanting to beat it again or try a new mode. I think that's another thing that ultimately that's a larger thing I think Metroid really needs to keep people to grow its audience, is to have more reasons to keep going back to Metroid other than every 2 or 3 years when a new game drops.
Yeah, yeah. Add Harvester as a multiplayer map, easy, right?
Harvester, I think, is one of the best maps made in a FPS game. I would love to see that come
Harvester
back.
slaps.
Harvester's great. Okay, so yeah, I think there's a lot that we agree on there, and maybe disagree on a little bit there. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of what Metroid Prime 4 and other Metroid games specifically change going forward, because certainly Samus Returns and Dread played with the formula. Maybe not so much Samus Returns, but certainly Dread played with the classic Metroid formula a bit. And I would say it's pretty likely that they'll continue to play with it for future 2D Metroid games, especially because it's kind of the start of a new saga, apparently, new story, whatever. And Metroid Prime 4, even though it's playing on the previous Metroid Prime, still seems like it's kind of the start of its own new thing. So I'm interested to see what it does new, because what we've seen from Metroid Prime 4 seems pretty familiar and not necessarily a change of the formula. So, like, what have we not seen that's going to be new, that's going to make the game feel fresh and not just, a game that maybe could have came out in 2008, instead of 2024. I'm interested to see that. Any closing comments there?
I think another thing is this, and I kind of get where it stems from. The whole conversation, it stems from us fans being afraid. We've already seen two major Metroid droughts, and while it doesn't necessarily apply to Nintendo as much, we're looking at the industry. We see all these layoffs and whatnot. We see all these studio closures, because games, didn't perform as well as, the higher ups wanted to. So I get where that comes from with the Metroid conversation, but I would also say right now, if anything, I'm only seeing positive signs for the series' future, not negative. I mean, Metroid Dread, sure, you could say it's on the Switch, which is Nintendo's, best performing console to date. It is still the best-selling title in the series. Not just best-selling Metroid title, it's Mercury Steam's best-performing title. And so, if anything, like I cannot possibly see how you could view Metroid Dread as anything other than a success. Maybe it wasn't as much of a success as we wanted, which I think is fair. I mean, obviously, I want to see Dread, sell 5 million, 10 million, 15 million, obviously, but like, just from an objective numbers perspectives, and even just the way Nintendo has acted around that game. I remember, when, the first major sales figures for Dread came out, it was actually before Nintendo's quarterly briefing, which almost never happens. They usually reserve the quarterly briefings to talk about game performance, but Doug Bowser got permission from Nintendo to actually post some of the early results ahead of time, because they were that impressed with how Dread was doing. So I think there's a lot of really good signs about the future of Metroid. And so I understand why, fans were scared, we're cautious, we're trying to look out for our baby, but I think our baby is going to be fine.
I mean, I feel like Metroid Dread selling 3 million copies is amazing. I mean, literally, what 2D side scroller games sell that many copies that aren't Mario or like like
A full price $60 game, not
yeah.
mind you.
So I don't know. But yeah, I think the future's definitely bright. I'm excited for what Metroid Prime 4 does, and whether or not it is more or less Metroidvania is also exciting to see. But I'm anticipating what we love about Metroid as well as some new stuff, which I think makes sense considering it's been a while since the last one. So with that, actually, we had some other questions we want to dive into, and one of those questions I think is actually is a great transition from what we were just talking about. So we have our Q&A episodes, and we have a Q&A channel in our Discord server, which once again you should join if you haven't already. And we don't necessarily get to every question on the Q&A specific episodes, so some of these questions kind of get left by the wayside, or we leave them for the next one, or stragglers are kind of thrown in there. And we figured, you know what, to round out this episode, since we've already got a half hour in the bag, let's get to a few of these questions that we haven't already, and some of them kind of pertain to what we're already talking about, like the question that I'm about to bring right now from Tony W36. Thank you, Tony, for this question. Exactly what we were just kind of talking about. What is one aspect of the classic Metroid Prime formula that you would not want to see changed in Metroid Prime 4? So we're just talking about, like, does Metroid Prime 4 need to be less Metroidvania? Now we're saying, okay, what specifically would you not want to change, even if it meant Metroid Prime is selling 100 million copies, but you don't want this thing to change? What would that one thing be?
I don't want the banger soundtracks to change, but no, on
Well,
a serious note,
we already lost that, man. The last
yeah.
game came out. But yeah, go ahead.
But on a serious note, one thing that I love about the Metroid games, and not everyone disagrees, but this is my personal opinion here, not necessarily what I think is best for the series, but I think Metroid is at its best when when you don't know where that next item could be. And a lot of Prime 2 and Prime 3 onwards, you stick with one area for the most part. They feel almost like less like a Metroid area, more like a Zelda dungeon, which I think for Echoes especially, it makes a lot of sense. With the light and dark world aspect, you're already pretty much going back and forth between those two anyways. But I think for a traditional Metroid, and granted, Prime 4 has time mechanics to a degree that we don't know yet, so maybe that could also affect with it. But from what we do know about it, and just as taking it as a traditional Metroid experience, I typically prefer that more kind of what I like to call the road trip style of exploration, where you can maybe spend a lot of time in one area, and then before you know it, the next item is going to be in a new area, and then maybe you'll have to go back to that first area again, and maybe you'll have to go back to the beginning area, and then you're kind of zigzagging all over the place. Ideally, you'd like to have good means of travel between the two. You wouldn't want to go from like the complete far side of the map to the complete other far side of the map. You'd like to have some shortcuts to make the traversal a little speedier, but ideally that's how I like to explore in Metroid. But that's just me. For a lot of people, I know that can be incredibly daunting, but maybe that's where those quality of life improvements and enhancements come to play.
Well, my answer was taken by the question asker, because Tony's answer was save rooms. Even though the game will most likely have autosave, I still enjoy the design of save rooms. And the music and animations of Samus when she is saving is always great, so I hope they keep save rooms. I agree. That's my answer as well. I've been on the fence because on one hand, I feel like checkpoints would probably help the games be more digestible. But for me, one of the best things about Metroid is like when you finally get to a save room and you have that chance to like decompress and like take a moment like, oh, I made it, like my game is saved, like, oh, thank the Lord, and you kind of take that moment to catch your breath and hear the music and whatever, right? And maybe end the session or start a new one. That to me, it could be kind of lost if you could just save at any point, or you get to a checkpoint and it just spawns you back in randomly in the middle of a random room where you were. I think some checkpoints are probably okay, like maybe boss checkpoints or something like that, but I would hope that like there aren't heavy checkpoints or auto saves or you can save anywhere. I wouldn't necessarily lose sleep over it, and maybe it would be better for the game, but I don't know. I think there's something about like keeping that aspect where you kind of have to like fight your way to a save station, or like, oh, you're low on health and you got to make it there. There's all that tension goes away if you could just save at any point, and or hit a checkpoint and you're good. Like if there's a little bit of like risk and a little bit of tension, a little bit more fun, I think, when you got to fight your way to a save room, or you got to get back in time, or you finally stumble upon one, you're like, oh, whew, thankful I'm here, you know. So like that kind of stuff I hope stays. I really like that. And yeah, I love the little fanfare you get as well.
Yeah, I think I agree with that as well. I think Metroid Dread has a pretty good balance with like the checkpoints and the save stations. I think the checkpoints only occur before bosses and the Emmy rooms. But I also agree that I would love just kind of the option to turn off checkpoints. One of the
Yes, if you could turn it off, I would love that.
yeah, back before we got the re-reveal of Prime 4, Andy and I did like kind of our Metroid Prime 4 dream pitch, and one of the things I actually suggested was a harder difficulty option. One of the things I actually suggested was just turn off all the checkpoints on that hard mode, just to add a little bit extra tension there.
I would 100% love to play that. I would agree with that. Okay, well, we'll keep it to more Metroid Prime 4 here. From Big Griff, from Griffin Olney. Would you like Prime 4 to have an equivalent of the Chozo Memories archives? And what do you think the chances of that would, of something like that being included? Something to that effect. What do you think?
Gonna say I'm gonna say no to this on the assumption that it functions exactly the way that it did in Samus Returns and Dread. Cause and I think it works. I think it works well for those games, particularly Samus Returns, I think. But one thing about the archives that I don't think would play quite as well with Prime 4 is that they're not coming from Samus's POV. And the Prime series is very much about getting into the various suit and experience the game as Samus would. And so I feel like it's important for all of those story elements, except for maybe like, the occasional post-credit scene here and there. Like obviously those aren't experienced from Samus's POV, but I feel like, main chunks of that story, I feel like it's imperative to be able to experience that as Samus would. And like if you are the player are gaining information, 99.9% of the time Samus should also be gaining that information.
I agree with that for the most part. I think it's okay to have some stuff that might be, have dramatic irony, for example, where, you might know it, but Samus doesn't. But yeah, I agree. For the most part, it should be if you're getting the information, because you're playing as Samus, especially in that, first person perspective, Samus, the character, should be aware of it. Yeah, I don't think it necessarily needs to serve the same purpose. I always thought, or I was thinking it would be kind of cool if maybe Samus, like some scans in the game are maybe like video files that are like, ancient or something, or like have to be decrypted and they're fuzzy or something like that. Like that could be kind of cool. And that way Samus gets it from her perspective and it's not so like, non-diegetic to the story and whatnot. It's kind of outside of it. That could be kind of interesting. Like that's something I would actually think would be more interesting, is playing more with scans in the logbook. Like not have everything just be a page with text. Give me some video files. Give me something to decode. Maybe there's like messages in there or something like that, just to maybe play more on just what you scan in the game. That could be fun.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was more so just going on like, what if it was a literal translation from like Samus Returns and Dread?
For sure.
But yeah, I do think there are, like you suggested, ways that you can adapt that a bit differently in Prime 4 and make it work really well.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm kind of going for. Is I think there would be more of an adaptation of it rather than just a one-to-one. I don't think it would really need to serve that same purpose and be executed the same way. Okay, we have a couple more questions to round it out here. This was one that you picked. This is from Metroida. How would we feel about movement combat abilities similar to Halo Reach's armor abilities being in the game? I imagine quick lateral movements, maybe using her back thrusters, allowing 3D Samus to feel quicker, more athletic. Yeah, so I mean, as someone who grew up playing Halo and then Reach added all those abilities, I was like, screw this. I might have a different opinion on it now, a decade and change removed. On one hand, I already feel like we kind of have this a little bit, right? Like Samus can already like strafe, which I'm pretty sure she uses her thrusters to do a little bit, right? Like she already kind of has a little bit of that quick movement. I'm trying to think of what the other armor abilities are. I mean, I'm not against like, obviously I'm not saying that she would have like one-to-one stuff from that game, right? But I'm not against like kind of those more cooler specific like suit ability, like active things you kind of have to activate. I mean, we already kind of have that a little bit in the 2D games, right? Like we have, you know, her Aeon abilities, right, which kind of serve essentially the same kind of purpose. So I don't think that's necessarily completely out of the realm of possibility for Metroid Prime.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Reach had there's everyone's favorite armor lock ability.
Yeah, armor lock, which I don't think we need that.
The jetpack. I think there's some interesting things you could do with that. There's that little hologram ability where
I
some guy
always
just
thought the
starts running out
hologram
in
was
front.
kind of fun. I like the hologram. That would be cool to send out a Samus hologram at some space pirates. I like all those fun ideas. I think that would be cool.
Yeah, I want to feel. Oh yeah, and there was a sprint. That was also technically an armor ability.
Sprint was
which I
an
feel,
armor ability on cooldown. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess that's kind of my thing. If it was literally implemented the exact way as it was in Reach, where it's like it's a literal power up you have to pick up and it's mapped to one specific button, I don't think I would be in favor of that. But if it was something like the Aeon abilities where you can only have one active at a time, but everything can be swapped in real time using like the D-pad or another set of buttons, or even like, beam swapping, in the actual Prime games. I feel like if it's something that you always have on you, but you're limited to only one at a time, I think that is what I would be in favor of. But if it's something where it's like a physical power up you have to pick up on the map to swap out and go back to, I feel like that would be really disruptive.
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, I'm more so much about giving Samus more abilities and gadgets to use in game that aren't just beams and extrapolations of her arm cannon, essentially. So that I'm always in favor of. And then in terms of like specific more movement and combat abilities, yeah, I mean, I would definitely be down for that. Like if we want to, give Samus a jetpack, give her, a stronger grapple to rip things down with, like that could give her the hologram, or then maybe she give her a blink in the Prime series. Like yes, I agree with you, Doom, on the implementation on it, but then the actual abilities, yeah, I think it would be great to give Samus in the 3D games a bit more freedom of movement and options of movement. As much as I kind of like I mean, some people disagree, and I think Andy would disagree with this because I think he's someone who would be like, the game should be kind of slower, and you shouldn't be able to just like mash your way and run through it super fast. Like you should be able to take your time. You should have to take your time and take things in and take it slowly, which I agree to an extent. But I do think having the option in circumstances where you need those options at times would be fun. You can have both, I think, where you can have the abilities and movement to be able to move across an area really quickly or have a really high stakes fight, but also have situations where you can't necessarily do those things or you don't want to do those things, and that's where the game naturally would be slower. And where they can be creative to force those different environments and situations, that's where I think the fun could be had in terms of developing the game. So I'm not against that. Like I would love for way more ways to be more flexible and faster and move better and smoother and have more freedom and precision and expression. I think too is a big thing, gameplay expression and player expression with Samus. Absolutely agree with that. And then also have situations where I don't or can't use those things in a fun way. Like don't force me into like I can't jump or anything type situation. And you can balance those things. I think that would be fun. I think that would be cool. And what we've seen in the 2D series, it makes sense because Samus has gotten those things in the 2D series. Maybe some people would disagree because you want to keep the 3D series to have its own maybe different energy than the 2D games. But for me personally, I think it would be more fun to maybe bring more of that into the 3D games as well.
Again, I 100% agree. This is the agreement episode right here. There's no arguments.
You can lie, here. Doom. You can come up with a different answer and lie. But no, I agree. Yeah.
But yeah, but Andy and I actually talked about this one time, and I feel like I agree. This is an instance where you can have your cake and eat it too. I think this is something where it's like, you let the training wheels out the player, you let them go as fast as you can, but then as a game you incentivize the player to slow down with various set pieces. I think a great example actually in Metroid Dread is the first time you encounter the Z57 husk. That's a game where for the most part you're just zipping your way through all the hallways and whatnot, but then you see this deceased carcass getting electrocuted, and I would say most players probably stopped and took a look at that. It probably took a lot of people by surprise, and I feel like you don't have to have that exact moment, but you have standout moments that kind of force the player to like pause and investigate. And you know what, if they're not interested and they just want to keep going, that's their choice.
Yeah, I think that's the option of choice there, but also not feeling like you have to do those things could be important. And maybe some people would say again, like, well, they should have to do those things. It's kind of part of the Metroid experience. I'm kind of thinking of like some people who would only want to run through it and then be forced to kind of slow down by the game, and they'd be like, oh, I don't want to slow down. It reminds me of like the Halo 3 campaign where you're going through it and then Cortana just starts talking to you in your brain and you are forced to stop moving. And I'm like, this sucks. And obviously that was not a great, implementation of it, but that always reminds me of it. But yeah, I think there is some valid argument to the other side though. Whereas if you give too much freedom and too much expression, then those faster options or the ones where the game becomes less deep might be the more fun or more popular ways to play the game. And you maybe lose some of the rest of the Metroid experience because people aren't scanning things and they don't need to slow down and they're like, I didn't even play the same game as you because I just ran through the whole thing. I think there's some validity to that. Well, let's change topics real quick. There, if you have nothing else to add, we have two more, and I like the last question, so we'll go to that one last. I won't change the order here. Second to last question from Steph121. On a scale of 1 to 10, would you like to see Mother Brain as a boss in the next Smash Brothers game, and would you like to have it be the Super Metroid chicken form or the classic Mother Brain in the tank from Nestroid and Zero Mission form, where it's immobile but shooting a lot of beams at you? Doom, as you mentioned, and as I was already aware of, but just to remind audiences, Mother Brain is already in that latter form in the tube for what is it?
Tank form.
Tank
Yeah.
form. Thank you. In the game as an assist trophy already. So personally, I think it'd be really cool if they made the chicken form, the final form of Mother Brain as a boss. They should bring back Subspace Emissary and bring back Ganon and Bowser working together, and then have Chicken Super Metroid Mother Brain on the team or something. I'd be down for that.
That would be absolutely sick. Yeah, I'm totally down for it. And yeah, Subspace does need to come back. I've always said like the ultimate Smash single player experience for me would be something with Subspace, with all the cutscenes and the collabs and the fan service. But then but do it like Melee Adventure Mode style, where like characters are still visiting like all these Nintendo worlds. Because that was my big critique with Subspace, was like it was all original kind of environments that kind of mimic some of the stuff from our favorite Nintendo areas, but it wasn't really. It was its own universe. And outside of the actual Subspace itself, where like it actually had like a lot of personality, I felt like a lot of it was just like, this kind of a general desert area that kind of could be a desert area from any Nintendo game, or your forest area. But it's like, no. I want to go to the Lost Woods. I want to go to the Super Mario Brothers 3 Angry Sun Desert. That's like, I want to go specifically there. And so I feel like you do. Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, I feel like that's the ultimate Smash single player for me, is Subspace Emissary, but like you're actually like in the actual Nintendo worlds.
I mean, I'm a big Subspace lover, and I didn't mind the more generic-y worlds that you go through. It was more so like, I just get to play a fun mashy platformer with the Smash gameplay and characters. But yeah, I loved all the cutscenes, loved all the. I mean, imagine with the roster now, all those cutscenes. Like, it would never get approved, but it would be awesome. And I love that idea. Yeah, you go to like specific areas in the different, like Kingdom Hearts style, essentially, going to all the different kind of franchises and whatnot. They got to do that. They got to do a good Kingdom Hearts campaign for Smash. But yeah, let's bring in Chicken Super Metroid Mother Brain. I agree with that. And finally, let's wrap. I really like this question. And this maybe I think goes back to like the original question that we were talking about, of like the feel of Metroid. Like, what is Metroid, and what part of that should be like retained a little bit. And certainly one of the things that should be retained, or like something that should be retained, is like the best feelings of Metroid, like those moments in game that are so satisfying and fun and great. And I think one of them for me is like getting to a save station, just in time, right? So this question coming from Big Griff again. General Metroid question: is there a better feeling than finding an energy tank when you're low on health? And I would love if everyone listening out there, feel free to share with us what your favorite Metroid feelings are. Like, what is a better feeling in Metroid than this? Unless you think this is the best feeling. But Doom, is there a better feeling than finding an energy tank when you're low on health in Metroid?
kind of going back to the music again, discovering a new area and the music is banger, which again, it's been a while since I've had that feeling. So Prime 4, you're up to bat. Just saying.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking forward to that for sure. So new music in the areas, like you're just like that perfect theme, really.
Yeah, yeah. I feel the last time it really especially hit me, um, honestly, it was Samus Returns, which a game that everyone thinks I hate Samus Returns for some reason. I don't. I think it's a fantastic game. I just don't like it quite as much as some of the other Metroid games. But like, I remember I was in the final area of that game, and all of the baby Metroid spawn. It's that classic moment in all the Metroid 2 iterations, whichever you played, where you think you're about to face the queen, and then they all spawn, and it's this completely organic feeling, just absolutely disgusting track. Like it feels like to me it's like the peak of Metroid music. This living organism that's actually somehow concocting music. Like and then all of a sudden I hear this faint light motif, and I can't put my finger on it, but I'm like, wait, I've heard this before. And then a few seconds pass, and I realize, wait, that's Torian. That's Torian. And then, like, right as it comes to hit me, all of the synthesizers come together and just blare that Torian theme. And I just, oh man, I popped off so hard. That might be my favorite Samus Returns moment in general, is just that realization of Torian. And to this day, still without a doubt, my favorite iteration of that theme. Just absolutely incredible, and to me, like the definition of Metroid music in its purest form.
Hmm. I mean, I'm not surprised that's your answer, considering your love of music and your background in that. I think that's a good one too. I mean, I think of going to Phendrana Drifts for the first time and just like, ooh, that's hitting right there in my earlobes. That's good. To not take that same answer, and also not to take the safe station answer. For me, I think, other than those, maybe it is my favorite one. It's when an escape sequence starts in a Metroid game. I think is probably my favorite. It's that's when like you got a time limit, there's a job to get done, I gotta get there, let's go, let's send it. That's to me a quintessential Metroid experience. You gotta have the escape sequence. Even the friggin' Orphe at the beginning of Metroid Prime, when they give you like 6.5 minutes, like a ton of time. Even then, I'm like, oh, all right, I gotta get this done in 6 minutes. I better get it done. Like just even that little bit of coyness there, of like, oh, you got some time, and it's distinctly on Metroid in a way, because like in a lot of ways of Metroid, like you don't have a time limit. It's just you can take your time, you can get through the game, and then the game's like, nope, you got to get this done. And I almost wish, I hope that Metroid Prime 4 has the solid, the best escape sequence, one that makes me really like get down to the wire, you know. That stuff I love. I love when an escape sequence starts, because that timer shows up on screen, the music changes, something, the alarms are blaring off, enemies are running all over the place. So it's always a lot of fun. So I would say that's probably that to me is a great feeling, when you've gotten to the portion of a game, in a Metroid game, where you've gotten to the escape sequence and now it's time to dance. That's a great feeling. So that's probably my pick.
That's such a good sleeper pick. I would have never thought about that, but yeah, you're right. That is like such a quintessential Metroid moment. It's almost like it's climactic. It's epic. To overuse words, but kind of going back to the music again. One of my favorite parts of Metroid escape sequences is when they actually incorporate the timer into the metronome of the beat. I always just get an absolute kick out of that.
I'll have to go back and listen to a little bit of that to really pick up on what you're talking about. But I know what you're picking up on.
Yeah. Listen to the Echoes version that Kenji Yamamoto does. Like the actual alert siren, the ba 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 ba. It plays in triplets along with the meter. Like it's a really cool effect.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to that one. Yeah, no, I love that. I love the Metroid escape sequence, and I really hope we get a good one in Metroid Prime 4. Like that to me is essential Metroid. So that's my pick there. All right, well, we are coming in at the hour mark, Doom, which I think we're doing pretty well time wise here. Don't you think? I think we've got everything wrapped up. Unless you have any other final thoughts on what we've talked about here today.
Um. I mean, kind of going back to our original topic earlier, like I said, and I think you agree, I'm not really concerned about Metroid at the moment. I think the series is in a good position. You could even argue like one of, if not the best positions the series has been in. So if anything, I'm incredibly optimistic about the future. I'm incredibly excited for, obviously I'm excited to play Metroid Prime 4. I'm also excited to see how it performs because I'm pretty optimistic that it's not a matter of if it's going to outperform Dread, but how much it's going to outperform Dread by.
Yeah, to me, I feel like the rest of the episode, we kind of talked about all these things we love about Metroid that we don't want to change, right? In the series, because we love them so much, and because I feel like they would appeal to anybody, really. Like these things that are just awesome gaming things that Metroid has. So, yeah, I think ultimately what we're gonna get from Metroid Prime 4 is something pretty familiar, and I'm happy with that. But I also think that ultimately a familiar Metroid game can still do well. It doesn't need to change that much. And maybe it does just come down to maybe we just need more Metroid, and maybe that would be enough, you know? Or maybe it would. Maybe it needs a little bit more to freshen things up. Truthfully, for me, it's like going back to like the Zelda comparison. Zelda gets games like every year. So maybe like that like change in formula was more impactful because you got so many of the traditional Zelda games time and time and time again. Whereas to me, I'm like, I want more traditional Metroid because we haven't gotten enough, and we haven't gotten to the point where now I feel like the formula needs to change because I'm not worn out on it. We're getting only the fourth Metroid Prime mainline game here in like 20 years. Like, give me 10 more before we start thinking about changing it to, Metroid Ring, right? Like that's kind of where I'm coming from. Like there's still so much like good Metroid to dig into that we haven't gotten to, whereas maybe other series they kind of went to that well one too many times. I still think the well is plenty full and deep for Metroid before it needs to change significantly, and I think it can still appeal to classic Metroid fans and new fans without changing too much. And I think we were already seeing that with Metroid Dread, whereas it's a classic Metroid game with some new bells and whistles and freshen things up, and it's the best performing Metroid game so far and one of the best reviewed and on many people's lists as the best Metroid game of all time. So I think if we continue
Yeah,
on that path, we really don't need to see Metroid not be a Metroidvania. I think we just need more Metroid, in my opinion.
I agree. Yeah, like, plenty of people, Dread was their first entry. We even have some people on the server, Dread was like their introductory to the series, and
What an intro.
got them. Yeah, I know, right? And
What an intro.
got him hooked. I have friends of mine where they played Dread for the first time, or maybe they did play a Metroid game, but they played Prime 3 or Fusion, and they didn't really revisit another game. But then Dread came out, and now it's like, man, now I do want to play, replay Fusion again, and maybe I'll play Prime Remastered now that that's came out, or I'll play Super Metroid now that it's on NSO or Zero Mission. And so yeah, I feel like Dread was like this really good jumping off point. And yeah, now that Nintendo is slowly porting the series over more to a concise console where it's all easily accessible, it's just making it a series that's more accessible to people in general.
I think we can all agree with that, and I think with that we can wrap things up here for this episode, Doom. I'm gonna go through our spiel real quick, but I think you all know the deal because you're already listening to the show. But you can find us all on your favorite podcast platforms. You can find us on Omega Metroid Pod on Twitter, on other socials. Like I said, check us out on our Discords. I think that's the biggest plug I want to give. Check us out on Discord. Come and hang out with us in the Discord server. We talk about Metroid in general. We talk about the latest releases. We talk about gaming in general. Everything in between. Come through and hang out with us. Of course, I am at DexCity_ on Twitter. At Doom Middle Cross, we have at Spatiri316 as well for Andy. Give us a shout. Let us know what you think about the show. If you have any questions, comments, even you don't even have to have a question. Just give us, you have a take and you want us to talk about it. Like, let us know. I think that's the most fun part about doing the show is engaging with what you all are interested in and what you all want to talk about. So that's why I also loved answering questions that the listeners throw at us because it gets us into some fun conversations. And even this episode entirely was built on a conversation that we had in the Discord server. So definitely join us there. We have a Patreon. We have an Etsy page where you can buy Omega Metroid merch. The Patreon has the great area ranking, which is an additional Omega Metroid Network type show, which you can check out. And I believe we just had a recent episode on that drop.
Yeah, I just guessed it on that episode.
That
yes,
you were just on. Yeah, so definitely check us out on Patreon. We have a YouTube channel where you can not only listen to the episodes, you can watch us and comment on the channel and see our beautiful faces as we talk about Metroid. We also have some really cool stuff coming up soon in the chamber in terms of some cool, potentially live content coming up in the near future, which we're working on. And obviously, we are excited for the next Metroid news, which you will be able to find out about, as well as much more at OmegaMetroid.com. So if you are playing Metroid, we have guides. You want to keep up on Metroid news, we have the show, we got the website. We have 100% completion guides. We have screenshots on the website. So if you want a full one-stop shop for Metroid, you can check us out at OmegaMetroid.com. Doom, I haven't done the ending spiel in a bit. Did I get everything?
If you enjoy the music that plays before and after the podcast, check out the free Omega Metroid podcast theme on our Bandcamp. You'll also find that link below as well. Otherwise, I think we pretty much covered all our bases.
Well, that is music to my ears and hopefully to all of yours as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for checking us out and tuning in here at the Omega Metroid podcast. We love talking some Metroid, and we're excited for hopefully some more Metroid news coming out soon, which we'll be talking about here on the show. We're looking forward to have Annie back soon. And thanks everybody for tuning in. And I don't have a really cool, fun, clever phrase to end it all, so I'll just say thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next mission here on the Omega Metroid podcast.